Alright, next up is this Han Solo Chewbacca one. Han hands James a blaster, and James, I want him to shoot the wall over here. So, from this point on, basically I need some camera tracking so I can add in a laser blast. So I'm going to pre-compose that and make a little thing. Apply the camera tracker to it using the default settings. Click to track features. It's going to run through. By the way, this is a sped up work session. My computer and I do not work as fast as we are from here out in the video. Great, tracked, wonderful. Let's try saving the camera. Let's try saving the project first. I'm going to click on Solve Camera. Error of a couple pixels, not too bad. So let's create the origin right there, create a scene. Now we have this tracked just like in some of our other projects. Great. I'm going to import some charges, some nice little explosions that are kind of self-contained. Scroll through a few of them and see which looks like a good blaster hit. And the winner is charge 15. I'll bring this in, make it a 3D layer, and that should place it right up on the corner there. Now, it's a little high for where I want it to hit. I want it to hit a little bit down lower. So I'll orient that toward camera, scale it up, and just kind of move it in space. Now this isn't a perfect track, but honestly the laser blast is hard to track anyway. I'm going to import this burn mark effect into the same thing. As I bring it in, I'm going to turn it kind of to match the perspective. This is not exact at all, but I think that it'll work for the short clip. I'm going to change its blending mode to multiply and just place it as the wall. I'll place the charge right in front of it so they sort of track together. That way, right as the camera comes over here, there's going to be this blast and the burn mark appears. So really pretty simple there. Great. I can play with the look a little bit more now. I can blur that stuff a little bit to match the footage. I'm going to matte off the burn mark so it ends right here on this panel. Great. It looks like it's sort of self-contained right there. I'm going to import some smoke. Just maybe a little... Let's try smoke. Let's try these smoke charges. As you see, they're kind of these cool, practical smoke effects. So I'm going to bring in this, and I'm really interested in just this little dab of smoke, so I'm masking it off, sort of like I will do in a future episode showing how to do the floor is lava. Scrub through here. Just kind of mask this one little curl of smoke. Great. Now if I kind of tie that down under here as a 3D layer and time it correctly to that original charge, I'll get kind of a charge, a blast, and some smoke puffing up. Great. So not too much to this one, really. Change this to a dark smoke. Yeah, looks like a burned char kind of effect. Make it go a little more upright. Great. Great. Next thing we'll need is a laser blast that goes from James' laser all the way over to the wall. So to do that, we'll turn to our good friend, create a new solid. I'm going to make this a 3D solid and make it so it's kind of aligned with the direction from the laser blast's hit and has sort of a trajectory toward James. That way, when I generate this beam effect, it's actually going to track in 3D space, and if I place the two starting and ending points kind of in the correct spot overall, I think that this will work perfectly. I just quickly checked YouTube to make sure that I had the correct color for the DL44 blasts. It looks like they're red as well. I didn't know if they separated the laser color much by character, but at least in the scene where he shoots at Vader, they are red. So going with that. And hits Vader, technically. So Han Solo continues to be a badass. Shot Vader in the hand. Or the Force pulled the laser blast toward Vader's hand so he could block it. I don't know. Do the stormtroopers miss because of the will of the Force? We'll never know. Add some muzzle blasts, and got a pretty good laser blast going on. We'll go ahead and call this one done. Next. And now we've got Boba Fett, who let James borrow his blaster here. We're going to add some blasts. Now, the way we're going to do that is just like the others, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this part. I'm setting a marker every time it looks like James fires the blaster. I'm adding a solid with a beam effect and keying the beam to kind of shoot from where the laser blast is to where it's going. And then after that, I'm going to load a bunch of stock footage of the muzzle flashes and placing them to time nicely with each of the laser blasts. Here's my muzzle flares. Align them. Blah, blah, blah. Standard kind of stuff. Alright, but now I'm going to take it a step further to try to make this a little bit more integrated and realistic. I'm going to start by adding a camera flare by adding a solid that's kind of an orangey color. I'm going to do a really wide feathered mask and change the blending mode to add. That'll kind of make it look like the whole screen is lighting up for just a moment. So I'm going to kind of time it so the opacity has a little bit of a flare every time he first fires the blaster. Now copy, paste that little arc every time the blaster fires. This is another reason those markers really come in handy. So now if I kind of preview through this, there's a little bit of a camera blast every time he fires the gun, which is perfect. I also want to add some smoke kind of trailing out of the gun. I think that'll look cool. So I'm going to start by tracking the tip of this gun. Looks like this should track pretty well, I hope. Thumbs up. Messed it up. Alright, let's fix that. Where was that? Somewhere right around here we get some crazy jumps. You can see it right in the data. So I'm just going to kind of track backwards and just step through this. There's a big camera shake right there. Track forward, try to match up until we're back with our properly tracked footage. And yeah, there we go. I'm going to apply that to the null object that I just created. Alright, I'm going to create a new solid and apply trap code particular. Once I've done that, I'm going to open up the emitter properties and go to the position. I alt-clicked on that. I'm going to pick whip it to the null's position, which isn't shown right now, so I'm going to type .transform.position. There we go. So now, basically, my emitter is linked to that null. I'm going to change the velocity to 0, and now, as you see, basically anywhere that null moved, dots are coming out. I'm going to use the cloudlet particles, and for the physics, I'm going to make the air have some wind in this y direction. Negative numbers for y basically makes things kind of drift up. And I'm using that instead of negative gravity because gravity has built-in acceleration, and that's no good. So adjusting the life size here a little bit, I'm going to make the size over life go from small to big. That's what smoke does. It kind of starts from a smaller point and dissipates. If I play with the opacity so it fades out, that'll kind of help. I can turn the opacity all the way down to just a teeny bit. And now I'm going to play with trying to get a good smoky look out of this. If I go to the shading, I can turn the cloudlet settings on. And what that does is it's adding this slight bit of a drop. It's kind of like an emboss on top of the smoke. It gives it this volumetric effect, which is kind of cool. So yeah, if it's a gray color, you can really see that it's putting shading on one side and kind of lightness on the other. As I scroll through, let's see, let's key the number of particles to be off at the beginning and then come on. Now smoke looks like it's starting to drift out the barrel of the gun. And what's kind of great about this is it just looks a little bit smoky, which is wonderful. It's automatically. I'm going to have the size get a little bit bigger toward the end and mess with the opacity. So it's just this hint of smoke coming out. Excellent. Now I'm going to duplicate my particular settings, so there's two of them. But for this one, I'm going to make the size of particles a lot smaller, so you'd have this more hairline, smoky path going through there. Change the size randomness down a little bit, so you can see in the middle there's sort of a thin little streak. I'm going to go into the physics setting, turbulence field, and grab the effect position setting. So as I increase this and decrease it, you'll see that that thin line of smoke is kind of getting distorted, which is nice. I'm going to turn up the opacity a teeny bit on him. So now that there's this nice little streak kind of that runs through it. It makes it look a little bit more like cigarette smoke or something. I can also go to the move with the wind setting. That way the turbulence field will kind of move up through space alongside with the wind. That negative y wind, which pushes the particles up off screen. I'll play this now, and you'll see it just kind of looks like a bit of smoke trailing out of the gun. Try to not make it too opaque or too noticeable, but I feel like it's helpful to have around. I'll let this guy preview. I think that maybe this will work better if over the course of this thing the smoke kind of is building up. It's a little bit too visible right now. So on both of these particular layers I'm going to have them be 100% opaque by the end, but I'm going to start them off a lot more faint. So now if you kind of watch through, you won't really see the smoke at first. You'll just get this hint of it, and then it'll become more and more opaque as time goes on. Now it just looks a little bit like it's a real smoking gun. And I have another idea actually, which will be to maybe add some physics to when the laser blast goes off, as if the smoke field is a little bit disturbed. Because you'd imagine a laser blast kind of would distort the airspace around you a little bit, so let's try to see if we can build that into this particle simulation a little bit. So to accomplish this, I'm going to set some keyframes on the physics wind X setting. I'm putting keys on both instances of particular and pressing U to reveal the keyframes. And then I'm going to link the X position, the X wind velocity of one to the other, so I don't have to worry about keys except for on this bottom one. So Watch this. As I dial up the X wind and then back to 0, you'll get this little burst where all the particles suddenly want to move forward off to the screen right, and then a moment later they'll kind of settle. So there, like the laser just blasted the smoke out of the way that had been building up for a while. I'm going to copy and paste these these keys, kind of to every time the laser is blasting. And I think what it'll look like is a lot more convincing gun smoke. And I think between the flash and the gun smoke and all of these things coming together, you get this very convincing laser blast that is more than a simple additive on top laser thing. The more of these little details you can add, the more believable some of these fantasy elements can become. Let's move these under the muzzle flash. Yeah, that's nice. All right. I'm pretty pleased with what this one is looking like, so I'm going to also call this one done. Next. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me like a year late for all of these videos. Sorry they're not very timely, but there's a whole bunch of them here if you want to click on any of them. So have a good day. May the Force be with you.